Have you ever tried gingerbread cookies with a light, buttery twist? These pale gingerbread cookies might just change the way you think about holiday baking. First up, the dry ingredients. In a large mixing bowl, I start with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Next, I add a 1/4 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, which gives the dough a subtle chocolatey depth. Then, I measure out 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda to help the cookies rise just enough. I also add 1/2 teaspoon of salt to balance the sweetness. Now, for the spices, the real stars of the show. I add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, which brings that warm, familiar, all-day flavor. Then comes 1 teaspoon of ground ginger for a little kick in depth. Next, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, adding a soft, nutty undertone. Finally, I sprinkle in a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves for that unmistakable, cozy aroma. These spices together are like a warm hug in cookie form. If you're feeling adventurous, a pinch of cardamom or allspice can add a little twist. You can also use a large sifter for this step if you want to feel extra fancy. But honestly, I'm a whisk kind of person. It's faster, less fussy, and let's face it, fewer dishes to clean. Give it all a good whisk or sift until it's fully combined, then set the bowl aside. I promise, this step alone will make your kitchen smell so festive, you might consider skipping candles this year. Quick note, I'm making a double batch because I'm not just filming this recipe, I'm prepping my Christmas cookies for gifting. Curious about how I package my cookies on a budget? Check out my other video. Just a heads up, the ingredient amounts here are for a single batch, so make adjustments if you're doubling like I am. Now, for the wet ingredients. Grab a medium-sized bowl and crack 1 large egg into it. Next, pour in 1/2 cup of maple syrup. It's sweet, rich, and brings a unique earthy flavor that really sets these cookies apart. Then, add a teaspoon of vanilla extract for that extra cozy aroma. If you're out of maple syrup, don't panic. Honey works just as beautifully. Give everything a good whisk until it's smooth and fully combined. And there you go, wet ingredients ready to shine. We're officially halfway to cookie heaven. Just a quick reminder, the measurements I'm sharing here are for a single batch, but I'm actually making a double batch because I need plenty of cookies for Christmas gifting. I've found it's easier to double everything from the start rather than making 2 separate single batches. This way, I can get all the dough I need in one go, which saves time and keeps things simple. If you're not making as many, you can stick with the single batch measurements I'm using here. Now, let's move on to the butter and sugar. I'm using my KitchenAid 7-quart stand mixer for this step. This mixer is a lifesaver when working with thicker cookie doughs like this one, especially since I'm doubling the batch. If you're using a smaller mixer, like a 5-quart tilt head, I'd recommend sticking to a single batch to avoid overloading it. Of course, a hand mixer works too, but be prepared for a bit of an arm workout when the dough starts thickening. In the bowl of my kitchen mixer, I add 3/4 of a cup of softened, unsalted butter. Room temperature butter is your best friend here. It creams so much better and makes the dough light and fluffy. If you didn't have time to soften your butter ahead of time, don't worry. I have a blog post with some quick tips to soften butter faster. Check it out for a time-saving hack. Then I add half a cup of granulated sugar. Want to switch things up? Coconut sugar is a great alternative and adds a hint of caramel flavor. Using the paddle attachment, I start mixing on low speed to avoid a sugar explosion, then gradually increase to medium. After 2 to 3 minutes, the butter and sugar are perfectly creamed. Don't skip this step. It's the foundation of your dough's texture and flavor. And don't forget to scrape down the sides of the bowl with a silicone spatula. You'd be amazed how much likes to hide up there. If you're looking for healthier alternatives for some of the ingredients in this recipe, I've got you covered. On my blog, I've put together a list of easy substitutions to make these spiced gingerbread cookies a bit lighter while keeping them just as delicious. Whether you want to cut back on sugar, swap in whole wheat flour, or explore other ingredient options, you'll find all the details there. It's a great way to customize the cookies to fit your dietary needs or preferences. Head over to my blog to check out the full recipe and all the healthier substitution tips. The link is in the description below. Once the butter and sugar are ready, it's time to add the wet ingredients. Slowly pour in the egg and maple syrup mixture and mix on medium speed until fully incorporated. The moment those warm spices and maple syrup blend into the butter and sugar, it's magic. Your kitchen transforms into a cozy December bakery, and you'll want to pause just to take it all in. Trust me, this is the kind of aroma that makes baking worth every step. Let's enjoy the process. This is why we bake. Now comes the dry ingredients. Gradually add them to the mixer, about a third at a time. Keep the mixer on the lowest setting and take it slow. This dough gets thick, and we don't want to overwork the mixer. If you're using a hand mixer, this is where you'll get your workout in. After each addition, mix just until combined. If the dough starts climbing up the paddle, stop the mixer and scrape it down. The goal is a smooth, slightly firm dough that holds together beautifully without being sticky. To test the consistency, pinch a small amount of dough between your fingers. It should hold its shape without crumbling or sticking too much. If it's too dry, add a teaspoon of milk at a time and mix gently. If it's too sticky, sprinkle in a bit of flour and mix just until it feels balanced. When it's ready, you'll know. It'll feel just right, like the perfect dough you can't wait to roll out. I hope you're loving the process of making these delicate pale gingerbread cookies as much as I am. There's something so special about creating cookies that are light, buttery, and full of warm holiday spices. It's a subtle twist on the classic, and I can't wait to hear what you think. If you're enjoying this recipe, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you'll never miss out on any of my festive baking fun. Do you have a favorite gingerbread recipe that's part of your holiday traditions? Maybe a classic, a family favorite, or even a unique twist of your own. I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Let's share ideas and keep the gingerbread magic alive together. Here on my channel, I love blending food photography with the joy of baking, inviting you into my kitchen to celebrate the creativity and warmth of the holiday season. From crafting perfectly spiced cookies like these to inspiring new ideas for your festive table. I hope you leave feeling excited to bake something truly special. Thanks for joining me on this holiday adventure. Let's roll out that dough and make some delicious memories together. Freeing the paddle attachment from thick dough can feel like a showdown with a sticky monster. But don't worry, you've got this. Just like I shared in my classic gingerbread recipe, grab a trusty silicone spatula and start scraping around the edges of the paddle. Work your way from the bottom up, gently coaxing the dough off. Rotate the paddle as you go to make sure no sneaky bits are left behind. If it's extra stubborn, a little twist of the paddle can do wonders. And let's be real, this keeps your hands clean and saves every last bit of that delicious dough. Because wasting it? Not on my watch. Now it's time to divide the dough. Normally, a single batch makes 2 or 3 portions, but since I'm doubling the recipe for holiday gifting, I'll end up with 4 or 5 discs. Here's my little trick. I start by placing a sheet of food wrap on the counter, making sure it's ready to go. Then, using a silicone spatula, I scoop a portion of dough onto the wrap. Instead of shaping it right away, I loosely wrap the dough first to avoid sticky hands, because who needs extra cleanup? Once it's wrapped, I press it gently into a flat, round disc. This method keeps everything neat and saves your sanity. After each disc is shaped, I stack them neatly in the fridge to chill. They'll need at least an hour to firm up, which makes rolling and cutting a breeze. Planning ahead, these dough discs freeze beautifully. Pop them into a labeled freezer bag with the date and pale gingerbread cookies dough written on it using a black Sharpie. Trust me, labeling is a lifesaver, especially when your freezer looks like a cookie dough treasure chest. It's not just about organization. It ensures you grab the right batch when you're ready to bake. Because let's face it, the last thing you need during holiday prep is grabbing chocolate dough when you wanted classic gingerbread. The discs will stay fresh for up to 3 months, so you're always prepared for a cookie emergency or a holiday baking marathon. Honestly, this is my little secret weapon for surviving the chaos of holiday baking. If you're curious about how I manage it all without losing my mind, I explain the full strategy in another video. While the dough is chilling, let's talk about what you can do with it. This pale gingerbread cookie dough is a dream for cutouts. Stars, hearts, snowflakes, you name it. My daughter loves helping me pick out the shapes, and over the years, we've made everything from pandas to ice skates. These cookies hold their shape so well, you don't have to worry about them spreading into blobs in the oven. But if you're a little worried about spreading, here's a tip. Add a tablespoon of cornstarch to your dry ingredients. It works wonders for stabilizing the dough and helps the cookies keep their sharp, clean edges while baking. Cornstarch also gives the cookies a slightly softer texture, making them even more irresistible. And decorating. That's the best part. Royal icing is my go-to. But you can also add sprinkles or even turn them into sandwich cookies with a cream cheese or chocolate ganache filling. The possibilities are endless. You know, this pale gingerbread cookies dough recipe is a fun twist on the classic gingerbread we all know and love. It's like a little blend of old traditions and new ideas. Gingerbread itself has been around for ages. Seriously, it dates back to medieval Europe, especially places like Germany and Scandinavia. They were the ones who started adding all those cozy spices like cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and cloves. But this version, it's got a bit of a modern flair. I swapped in unsweetened cocoa powder and maple syrup, which isn't exactly medieval, but it adds such a rich depth of flavor. The cocoa gives it that subtle, chocolatey vibe, and the maple syrup brings this earthy sweetness that's so perfect for the holidays. It's like a little nod to North America while still keeping that old world charm. And funny story, years ago, I stumbled upon this recipe while browsing at my local library. I wasn't even looking for it, but I found this amazing book called Modern Gingerbread by Sandra Monger. It totally caught my eye, and once I tried the recipe, I was hooked. It's not exactly straight out of an ancient recipe book, but it's inspired by those traditional holiday flavors. And it's just the perfect mix of nostalgia and creativity. Honestly, every time I make it, I feel like I'm putting a fresh spin on something timeless. I take the disc out of the fridge and let it chill, but not too much, on the counter for about 10 minutes. Trust me, this step is everything. If it's too cold, rolling it out feels like arm wrestling a brick. Not exactly festive. Too warm, and it turns into a sticky situation nobody wants. Before I get rolling, both literally and figuratively, I like to make sure I've got everything I need within arm's reach. Trust me, there's nothing worse than getting halfway through and realizing you're missing something. Here's my go-to lineup. My trusty adjustable rolling pin for perfectly even cookies every time. Parchment paper or a silicone mat, because who wants dough sticking everywhere? Not me. A solid baking sheet, gotta have a sturdy base for all our masterpieces. Vinyl gloves, totally optional, but they're a lifesaver if you want to keep your hands clean and dough-free. Cookie cutters. This is where the fun really starts. I always have my favorite festive shapes ready to go. A cake spatula, essential for lifting those delicate cookies without losing their shape. A dredge for sprinkling flour, optional but one of my must-haves for baking. It's a game changer for lightly dusting the surface without overdoing it. Now that we're all set, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dive in. And hey, if some of these tools are new to you, no worries. I've linked them all in the description below to make it easy. I start by sprinkling a light layer of flour over the counter. It's my go-to trick to keep the dough from sticking. Personally, I like to throw on a pair of disposable vinyl gloves for this step. They're such a game changer when handling sticky dough, and cleanup is a breeze. But hey, if you're the kind of baker who loves getting your hands a little floury, go for it. Embrace the mess. Once that's done, I plop my unwrapped dough disc onto the floured surface, and just like that, we're ready to roll. I grab my trusty adjustable rolling pin and roll the dough to a perfect 1/4 inch thickness. The adjustable pin ensures even cookies, so no crispy edges or doughy centers to worry about. If your dough starts sticking to the pin, don't panic. Sprinkle a tiny bit of flour on top or lightly dust the rolling pin. Here's another way to roll out your dough mess-free. Sandwich it between 2 sheets of parchment paper. No flour dusted all over the counter, no sticky mess, and cleanup is as simple as tossing the parchment. Plus, it keeps the dough smooth and easy to handle. Perfect for stress-free holiday baking. Okay, I'm going to let you in on my little holiday baking secret. It's how I stay sane during the madness. Here's what I do. I make the dough ahead of time and freeze it. Then, when I have a free moment, I bake the cookies and freeze them again, fully baked. The real magic happens about a week before gifting. I pull them out, let them thaw, and then start decorating. Here's the best part. You can start this whole process as early as September. It's a total lifesaver. The cookies stay fresh. I avoid the chaos of last-minute baking marathons, and I actually have time to enjoy the holidays. Trust me, once you try it, you'll never go back to the old way. Time to grab my cookie cutters and start stamping out some festive shapes. I'm keeping it simple and classic. A little tip from me: stick to cutting similar sized shapes for each baking sheet. This way, all the cookies bake evenly and you won't end up with some overbaked or underdone. Trust me, it makes a big difference. Once all the dough is cut into cookies, I carefully pull away the extra dough from around the shapes. Don't even think about tossing it. This dough is reusable gold. I always save it for the next round of rolling and cutting. Here's a handy tip from me. Gather the scraps, form them into a ball, and loosely cover it with food wrap. This keeps the dough from drying out while you're busy transferring cookies to the baking sheet. I grab my baking sheet and line it with parchment paper. Pre-cut sheets are my go-to. They save so much time, but a roll works perfectly fine too. I carefully use a cake spatula to lift each cookie off the counter and onto the parchment-lined baking sheet. This little tool, game changer. It keeps the shapes intact and saves me from accidentally squishing or stretching them. Trust me, nothing's worse than a Christmas tree that looks like it melted. If you don't have a cake spatula, no worries. A thin, flat pancake spatula or even a large butter knife can do the trick in a pinch. Just be gentle. I always make sure to space the cookies about 1 inch apart on the sheet. This gives them enough room to bake evenly and allows proper airflow. It's a small detail, but it makes a big difference. When I'm done cutting out the cookies, I gather up the dough scraps and press them back into a disc. Then I roll it out again to cut even more cookies. If the dough starts to get too soft after a couple of rounds, here's a quick fix. Pop it back into the fridge for about 10 minutes to firm it up. It'll make rolling and cutting so much easier. I keep going until every last scrap is transformed into festive little cookies. Waste not, want not, especially with something this delicious. A single batch makes about 24 spiced gingerbread cookies, depending on the size of your cookie cutters. If you go for smaller shapes, like tiny stars or mini gingerbread men, you'll get even more cookies to enjoy. It's such a fun way to stretch the dough and have a little extra for sharing, or let's be honest, for sneaking a few yourself. Here's a little tip from me to you. When you're baking, keep cookies of the same size on one sheet. Mixing big and small cookies together? Disaster. The little ones will overbake while the big ones are still gooey. Grouping by size, make sure everything comes out perfectly golden and just right. Oh, and if you're as gingerbread obsessed as I am, you have to check out my gingerbread playlist. I've got a ton of recipes, from the classic gingerbread men we all love to fun twists you might not have tried yet. It's like a gingerbread wonderland, and I know you'll find something that makes you want to dive right back into baking. Let's keep this gingerbread adventure going. This year, I'm shaking things up in the kitchen. Instead of sticking to my usual gingerbread cookie routine, I've decided to experiment with not one, not two, but multiple gingerbread flavors. And here's my secret. To keep track of all the delicious variations, I am baking each flavor in a single cookie cutter shape. It's like my little flavor coding system, so when it's time to share or sneak a taste, I'll know exactly which cookie is which. If you want to try something new with your gingerbread this holiday season, head over to my gingerbread playlist. I've got recipes for every flavor mood, from warm and spiced to citrusy and bright. My personal favorite? The orange zest gingerbread. It's tangy and festive. But some of my friends swear by the spiced gingerbread for that classic holiday flavor. What about you? Let me know which flavor is your favorite. If you are baking cookies to gift this holiday season, don't forget that how you package them can make all the difference. In my video on how to package homemade cookies for gifting, I'll show you simple and creative ways to make your treats look as amazing as they taste. From festive wrapping ideas to adding personal touches like ribbons and tags, you'll find everything you need to make your homemade gifts extra special. Be sure to check it out and get inspired for your holiday baking. secret trick. Don't tell anyone. Before baking, I always sneak the baking sheet into the fridge for about 10 minutes. Why, you ask? Well, here's the science. Chilling the dough firms up the butter in the cookies, which slows down how quickly it melts in the oven. This gives the cookie structure a chance to set before spreading, keeping those shapes crisp and perfect. And here's the key. Straight from the fridge, they go right into the fully preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right. Make sure your oven has reached its ideal temperature before those cookies go in. No delays, no detours, just perfectly shaped cookies every single time. Now you not only know the secret, but also the science behind it. Talk about being a baking pro. All right, it's oven time. I grab my chilled baking sheet and place it right on the middle rack of my fully preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the sweet spot for even baking. I bake the cookies for about 8 to 10 minutes, keeping a close watch. The edges should look just set, while the centers will still be soft. Don't worry, they'll firm up as they cool. Here's a little insider tip from me. If you've ever battled with burnt cookies, haven't we all? Start with the minimum baking time, 8 minutes here, and check on them. Your altitude above sea level plays a big role in baking, so adjust as needed. If the cookies need extra time, give them another minute. For me, baking at high altitude, 9 minutes hits the sweet spot every time. Soft centers, perfectly set edges, and no burnt bottoms in sight. Baking isn't just about creating delicious treats. It's also about keeping your space clean and ready for the next batch of fun. While the cookies are baking, and maybe another batch is chilling, it's the perfect time to tidy up the counter. Here's my quick method. I grab my trusty dough cutter and scrape up all the flour and bits of dough from the surface. It's amazing how much easier this makes cleanup. Once I've gathered the mess into a neat little pile to toss, I wipe the counter clean with a damp cloth. It's oddly satisfying, and it leaves me with a fresh workspace ready for the next round of holiday baking chaos. When the cookies come out of the oven, I let them rest on the baking sheet for about 5 minutes. This little pause gives them time to set and firm up before I move them. Then I carefully transfer them to a cooling rack to cool completely. Trust me, this step is non-negotiable if you're planning to decorate them. Warm cookies and icing, total meltdown. But if you don't have a cooling rack, no worries. You can lay the cookies out on a clean sheet of parchment paper or a kitchen towel. Just make sure they have enough space to cool evenly and don't stack them, or you'll end up with stim-softened cookies. I usually rely on my trusty cake spatula to transfer freshly baked cookies to the cooling rack because they're still soft and way too hot to handle. And there you have it, pale gingerbread cookies, the perfect balance of warm spices and a light, buttery flavor that will bring extra magic to your holiday celebrations. These cookies are soft, subtly sweet, and just begging to be decorated or devoured straight off the cooling rack. Whether you're gifting them, sharing with family, or sneaking a midnight snack, because who's watching? These cookies are guaranteed to be a holiday hit. But hold on, the fun isn't over yet. Now that your cookies are baked, it's time to bring them to life with some festive decorations. Head over to my next video, where I'll show you how to turn these simple cookies into stunning works of holiday art. From easy icing tips to fancy designs, I've got you covered. Trust me, it's way more fun than untangling Christmas lights. Thank you so much for baking with me today. It's always a joy to share these moments with you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you won't miss any of my festive baking adventures. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, happy baking and happy holidays. Oh, and maybe hide a few cookies for yourself before the decorating frenzy begins. I won't tell.